Hey, I'm Daniel and welcome to a complete beginner's guide to the Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era. And before we begin, I would like to clarify two things. What is this and who is this for? So first of all, this video is all about gameplay tips and strategy, and we're not gonna cover game rules. For how to play from the rules perspective, I'd recommend checking out the official tutorial from Cheap Theory Games or BotSE Helper, and I'll put links to both of these resources in the video description. And secondly, this video is aimed for beginners, people who are maybe waiting for the game copy, or maybe who played a couple of times but didn't have much success. But if you are already a seasoned player, I hope this video is something you could share with the people joining your gaming group so you can all have more fun together. And also keep in mind that I'll be focusing mostly on true solo on expert difficulty, because this is by far the most challenging way to play the game. Once you learn how to survive in the lands of Tamriel by playing as a single adventurer, then you'll have no problems in playing with more adventurers as well. So let's start by doing the same thing as you would normally do when you start playing the game, by character creation. If this is your first campaign, it is recommended to play the Jailbreak scenario, which lets you choose a class. And I think Jailbreak is a nice thematic way to start, especially if you're a fan of the Elder Scrolls video games, but keep in mind two things. First, it will increase the length of your first playthrough, and to be fair, your first campaign will likely take quite a bit of time already. And secondly, after completing Jailbreak, you're presented with a class that is based on your actions during that scenario, but that class may end up not exactly the one you wanted to play, or maybe not the most beginner-friendly class. So personally, when I was teaching my wife and my son how to play, I decided to skip the Jailbreak scenario altogether, and instead I asked them the following question. Do you want to shoot arrows? Do you want to cast spells? Do you want to swing a sword, or do you want to swing a big sword? I think this way keeps things thematic but makes the choice based on the preferred playstyle and archetype. And based on the answers, I presented them with the following options, which are basically pre-made characters. Wood Elf Archer with bow, High Elf Sorcerer with destruction staff, Gadget Acrobat with one hand and shield, and Argonian Dragonknight with two-handed. And on that note, I would probably suggest avoiding picking the following classes for your first play: Spell Sword, Nightblade, Pilgrim and Necromancer, and also Burglar and Arcanist if you have the Valuable expansion. And by the way, I have a separate video where I have a deep breakdown and analysis of each class, so you might want to check it out as well. And now I want to be super clear that in this game you can play and have fun and success as absolutely any combination of races, classes and skills. But these four are just my personal recommendation for your first couple of plays, and you can even play safely all of them at once if you're playing with 4 players, since there is no overlap between these characters, meaning you won't have problem fighting for any particular skills, even though, as I said, this video is mostly focused around true solo. And of course, I don't want to just say, hey, here are the 4 characters, play them. I want you to understand and be able to spot synergies, so let's break down why I choose those specific combinations. But before that, let me quickly explain how I approach characters overall. So broadly speaking, your character needs to have 3 areas covered: damage, survivability and utility. Damage is a pretty straightforward area. Anything that either deals direct damage or helps you to deal more damage is good. And you should really not underestimate how much damage you need to deal in order to win the game. For example, when you're playing true solo and your enemy pool is high enough to deploy 8 enemies, it means you need to be able to defeat more than 1 enemy each turn. Otherwise you'll get into fatigue rounds, which is a big trouble and honestly arguably the biggest threat in this game. Survivability is the next area you need to keep in mind, because even if you're able to defeat 2, 3 or even 4 enemies in a single turn, ultimately your damage is still capped by your available skill dice, space in your cooldown track and your tenacity, all of which are pretty limited resources. So it's a good idea to have some ways of either direct damage mitigation or at least some healing capabilities. And last but not least, utility is a broad category which can include things like your character's mobility, recovery and other useful tools. The game often throws at you challenges that go beyond simple damage, and unless you have certain ways of dealing with those challenges, you may end up in big troubles. Specifically, I'm talking about some of the nastiest enemy skills such as Stalwart or Elusive or Shatter, Rally or even Divert, especially when combined with Recover. Obviously, you will learn more about the enemies as you play, but in general, whenever I create a character, I always keep in mind how I would solve the puzzle of having some of those enemies standing in my way. Now let's get back to the 4 recommended characters and look at them through that lens. And by the way, if you look at the character creation process in the rulebook, it says that you need to select a race first, then choose a class, and this is all good, and some might argue that this is the most thematic way, but personally I prefer and suggest picking your class first, then skill line and only then selecting a race. So let's go with the Archer first, which is probably the easiest example. If you look at the class abilities, almost all of them require you to be in ranged battle form, so it makes sense to go with a skill line that also uses the same battle form. In the base game, we have a single skill line bow, so yeah, as I said, it's a pretty obvious choice and this is our main damage. Now for the race, I would say it's less straightforward, and as I mentioned earlier, you can safely choose any race for any class, but in this case I suggest going for Wood Elf for a few reasons. First, Wood Elf stats are nearly perfect for our ranger. We likely won't need any Magicka, and we do need a lot of stamina, plus 5 health and 2 combat are very useful too. And for the racial ability, once per battle we can gain a stealth status die, which can help with survivability, as I mentioned earlier, we need it as well. And for the time when we do get hit, Hawkeye ability is a decent healing tool, especially since it scales with both your range and the number of enemies around. And when it comes to utility and specifically dealing with those nasty enemies, we do have a couple of tricks in our toolkit. For stalwart enemies, there is an innate ability that is pretty much a passive damage, dealing 2 damage every turn, which is great for chipping away health from those enemies who you don't usually want to spend your precious skill dice on. For divert, when you need a bit of extra little damage to finish off those enemies, there is a class ability called Lethal Arrow, which is fantastic for that purpose. Besides, a level 2 skill die from the bow skill line called Acid Spray can also help with both stalwart and divert enemies, though keep in mind it's not very reliable. Elusive is probably the only skill that we don't have a clean answer to, and honestly my best piece of advice is to use your Hunter's Discipline ability so you can replace a deployed elusive enemy for another one and hope that the next enemy you draw from the back doesn't have that skill. And for Shatter and all of those type of enemy skills like Chillblain and Fumes, the level 4 skill die Scatter Shot is a great way of dealing with those enemies, as well as a Little Arrow, which I already mentioned, because they allow to deal damage without engaging enemies and therefore not triggering their abilities. So damage checked, survivability checked, utility checked. Next, let's go over the Sorcerer. And again, if we look at the class abilities, almost all of them require magic battle form, so it makes sense to match this battle form with our starting skill line. But unlike with ranged, in magic battle form we have multiple options in the base game: Destruction Staff, Daedric Summoning and Restoring Light. And I would say depending on the party size and the playstyle you're going for, one can suit better than the other, but generally speaking, whenever you play as Spellcaster, I suggest picking Destruction Staff as your first skill line, even if you're also planning to train Daedric Summoning or Restoring Light later on. And to go even further with this, I would say it's a good idea to start with a damage dealing skill line in general, not only for the Sorcerer but for any class as well. And as I always say, you can pick absolutely any skill line and still succeed with it, but starting with a damage dealing skill line just makes the battle flow a little smoother, so this is why it's my personal recommendation. Now for the race, there are many good options, but if you look at the level 1 skill dice of Destruction Staff called Force Shock, 2 of their faces deal 1 true damage to an adventurer, which means if you're playing through solo, there is a 30% chance that you would take damage whenever you roll these dice. So to help offset this damage and have an easier time, I'd pick High Elf, because the racial ability allowing you to heal an adventurer for 3 HP comes really handy when using Destruction Staff, and High Elf is also the only race that starts with 4 Magicka, which is perfect for our Spellcaster too. For the utility, we have plenty of options. On level 2 of Destruction Staff, there is a skill called Wall of Elements that can apply Fear to any enemy in range, and Fear is the ultimate answer against some of those enemy skills because it shuts them down completely. Now of course there is only 1 out of 6 chances of landing that particular phase, and the die itself is drained after use, but it's still pretty helpful, especially if you combine it with Power Stone from Daedric Summoning. But that's not all, because there is also another level 2 skill die called Destructive Touch, which can instantly defeat a level 1 or 5 enemy by passing all of their skills. And even though this die is a little bit tricky to use, Power Stone can help with that as well. Also there is a class ability called Dark Exchange, which specifically on the master side is a great tool for working around Elusive and Shatter and many other enemy skills, which overall is a fantastic offensive and defensive ability. So again, damage checked, survivability checked and utility checked. Next, let's have a look at the Acrobat. And the first thing I check is whether there are any battle form requirements, and unlike in previous examples, there is actually none. Only Tumbling requires a defensive battle form, but even that gets removed on the master side, which overall means that Acrobat is a very flexible class that can work very well with any damage dealing skill line, but because Arcane Alacrity and Fighting Finesse affect only adjacent enemies, I will go for One Hand and a Shield skill line, which normally has a couple of major weaknesses that I'm going to talk about in a moment, but Acrobat compensates them very nicely. For survivability, I guess level 1 skill die Shield Discipline tumbling can provide some damage prevention, but from my experience that is usually not quite enough, especially since those dice are not always sit in your active slots. But thankfully it is easily compensated by the Acrobat's tumbling, which is arguably one of the best damage mitigation abilities in the game. And for utility, this is honestly one of the main weaknesses of the One Hand and Shield skill line, because it does have a good burst of damage, but that's about it. Whenever you go for this skill line, you need to think of other ways of dealing with Shatter, Stalwart and all of those usual tough enemies, because there are no built-in ways to answer those challenges, maybe with a small exception of defensive posture, but even that is a bit debatable. But this is exactly why Acrobat is such a good pair for One Hand and Shield, because we have Fighting Finesse, the easiest, most consistent and reliable way of applying a Fear status die, which, as already mentioned, completely negates all enemy skills. But there is more. Unlike other damage dealing skill lines, One Hand and Shield mostly focuses on a single target damage, but remember what I said earlier, you need to find a way to defeat multiple enemies per turn. And thankfully, Acrobat's Arcane Alacrity that deals area damage to all adjacent enemies and Quick Recovery that allows you to recover and roll the same dice again can both help with exactly that. Now obviously there are multiple ways of solving all of those problems, so again you can totally play One Hand and Shield skill line with other classes, but since here I'm showing you synergies and how to think about building your character, I think Acrobat is a nearly perfect combo for that. And for the race, unlike for the two previous characters, we don't really need any defensive racial ability to cover the class or skill line weakness, so in this case I'd go for Gadget. And besides the fact that gadgets are cats and I'm definitely a cat person, they have a very decent spread of stats, and also the racial ability can help you to go with the must upgrade and reduce the amount of fatigue in your cooldown track. So once again, damage checked, survivability checked, and utility definitely checked. And for the fourth and final recommended starting character, let's have a look at the Dragonknight. Going for the same approach, I first check if any abilities require any particular battle form, and actually none of them do. However, Molten Weapons, which is a good source of damage, only works with combat dice, so you cannot roll them in magic battle form, and the same is true for Dragonknight Standard, which works for non-magic battle forms only. And if you look at Dragon Blood, the enduring ability for 3 tenacity, it can remove fatigue from your cooldown track. And guess what generates a bunch of fatigue? Two-handed skill line. Two-handed is an amazing damage dealing skill line, and most importantly it has both area damage and an instant defeat effect, allowing you to pretty easily deal with all of those nasty enemies. The main downsides of two-handed are that it generates fatigue and a couple of skill dice are drained, but thanks to Dragon Blood and also Cauterize, which allows you to recover drained dice, you can completely negate those downsides, so Dragonknight has a fantastic synergy with two-handed. The only problem is that literally nothing from this toolkit helps you with survivability in any way, with maybe except Dragon Blood during fatigue rounds, but even that is not really damage prevention. There are multiple ways to balance that weakness, from other skill lines to items, but the easiest one for a start is by using a racial ability. I would say both Argonian and Imperial provide exactly that, with a little twist that Imperial prevents damage only when you're dealt 3 or fewer damage, for the upside of gaining that much tenacity, but honestly we don't need it that much, so I would go with Argonian instead, that can prevent any amount of damage. Obviously racial abilities are only once per battle effects, so later you'd still want to extend your defensive toolkit, but that is already a good start. So now we have the key areas covered: damage checked, survivability checked, and utility checked. And obviously all of that was just an example of how I usually approach my character creation, to think about some other synergies or weaknesses and how I could cover them. With classes, races and skill lines selected, let's add all of that to each adventurer mat, because there are some things to consider as well. Let's once again have a look at our Wood Elf Archer and see how we can set up their adventurer mat. First, I'll place health stat in the top left corner, as this is just my preference. Next, for stamina, there is already a question whether to place the stat across health or on a new row, and I think I'll choose the latter, because Archer definitely needs a lot of stamina and ideally some extra health as well. So I'm slotting in stamina over here along with 3 square stat tokens. And now for Magicka, this is where the real question comes in, because the placement of this stat heavily influenced by the build you're going for. Now on a side note, obviously if this is your first playthrough, you are not expected to know such things, so don't overthink it and just place it all stats and skills whatever you like. But once you get a grasp of how things work or what other skill lines do, you can use this knowledge strategically to pre-plan your build ahead. And now during the adventure mat setup is the best time for it. Just to give you a quick demonstration, an archer using light armor skill line from the Valenwood expansion is a very good variation of this build. And because light armor is a Magicka based skill line, you would need to slot in your Magicka stat token either on a new row under stamina or across health, but not across stamina, as otherwise you won't be able to level up either of these stats high enough. But in this example, I'm not going for Magic Archer, and in fact I'm not planning to use Magicka at all. So in this case, slotting in Magicka across stamina is actually the preferred way. And remember that Magicka is the only stat that can be untraded entirely if needed, so generally speaking, for pure stamina builds like I'm going for with this archer, this is where I usually place my Magicka stat token, and so this is what I'm going to do here too, along with its corresponding stat token. I hope this example gives you a good understanding of why planning your builds ahead is so important. Okay, but what else do we need then if we're going for a pure stamina build? And honestly, not much, and this is exactly why this is such a good beginner-friendly build. Just place combat on a new row under stamina with its 2 combat skill dice, and then add bow at the bottom row, like so, with 2 level 1 snipe dice, and keep the right side open, meaning don't add anything there so you're able to train the full row with this skill line. You can then train acrobatics across combat, and by the way, this level 1 Fleet Phantom can help dealing with elusive too, or you can train speech or legerdemain across health, but it's completely up to you and it isn't that hard once you have a good foundation set up. For our Acrobat and Dragonknight characters, since I'm going for pure stamina builds for them as well, I will set up their mats the exact same way just like I did for Archer. So here is how the Acrobat mat end up looking, with Magicka across stamina and combat and the main damage dealing skill line on their new rows, and the same is for Dragonknight as well, with the only difference that I'll probably train heavy armor instead of acrobatics on this right slot across combat, but the overall pattern is the same. Now let's have a look at a pure Magicka build with our High Elf Sorcerer, because there are a couple of things to keep in mind too. For a starter, I'll slot in health first as usual, and then right over the bat there is a question where to slot in stamina. You see, one of the benefits of using Magicka based skill line is the fact that there are 3 of them in the base game, plus 2 more if you have the valued expansion, and you can quite effectively use them together. So a good question to ask, especially when you create a spellcaster, is how many skill lines you want to train and how many skill dice from each one you want. Let's have a look at 2 examples. Let's say you start with Destruction Staff over here in this slot, and let's say you want to train all 6 dice in this skill line. You would likely want to have at least 5 Magicka, which is probably slotting on a new row under health with combat across it and stamina across health. A setup like this allows you to safely train 2 more skill lines, something like Daedric Summoning and Restoring Light on either end of this row. But now let's swap things a bit. First, I can place combat across the main skill line, and remember that you can untrain combat dice, so it's not a problem here. But then I'm going to swap Magicka and stamina, so I'm going to take everything off and place stamina underneath health and Magicka across health. This doesn't seem like a big change, but since it's pretty unlikely that you would need more than 4 stamina, it means you can now train another skill line across it. Of course, you would still need 5 or even 6 Magicka, which means you won't be able to advance health that much, so this setup is a little bit more aggressive, allowing you to train more skill lines, but with the trade-off of being potentially a little squishy, so basically like a glass cannon. Now, keep in mind that one is not necessarily better than the other. The whole point of me demonstrating this is just to share this mindset of thinking how many skill lines and skills from those skill lines you want to train while you're still at the character creation step. Alright, so we finally created our characters and there are still plenty of useful tips ahead. But if you enjoyed the video so far, give it a like, subscribe to the channel and consider supporting me on Patreon. Videos like this take a huge amount of time and effort to put together, so any bit of support really means a lot. Alright, now let's move on and talk about the first thing you do once you start playing, and that is resolving a day 1 town encounter. So a town encounter offers a lot of things. In this example, let's take a look at Little Moth, which is one of the starting towns in Black Marsh, and it has all 7 town actions available: shop, trainers, tavern, quest board, guild kiosk, town square and alchemy station. But how do you know when it's worth spending a town action on a particular thing or not? And well, let's zoom out for a moment. As you progress through the main quests, the game will constantly throw challenges at you, pushing you across the map, restricting your actions and putting various obstacles in your way. And all of that culminates in the end game, which is the real test for your adventurer. So your character needs to become significantly stronger by the time you get there, and it has to do that despite the time limit and everything working against you. So generally speaking, your character gets stronger in 4 different ways: by gaining experience that you then spend on advancing your stats and existing skill lines, by training new skill lines, expanding your overall toolkit, by gaining items that give you temporary boosts or permanent bonuses, and by promoting your class to the master side, which is usually a pretty big power spike too. So now let's get back to our day 1 town encounter and look at all available town actions through that lens. Trainers are unique to town encounters because there is no other way of training new skill lines, and it is one of the 4 main ways of getting stronger. So generally speaking, trainers are the top priority for me among the available town actions, especially in the early game, and this is especially true for classes whose must upgrade requires training certain skills, like Pilgrim, Rogue or Spell Sword. That said, training new skill lines as a way of getting stronger has a hard limit, so while trainers are the highest priority in the early game, they quickly become less relevant once you train the skill lines you wanted. So in the mid to late game, which is typically in session 2, they tend to drop to the lowest priority for me. Next, shop. Unlike trainers, items are not unique to town encounters and you get them in many other ways, including caches, quest rewards and more, but I would say that among all town actions, a town shop is usually the only one that can provide an immediate power boost to your character. Even when you learn a new skill line as a trainer, you don't instantly get any new skill dice, so it might take a while before that investment pays off. But for items, even though many of them aren't very strong, they can still give you something useful that you can already use in the upcoming battle. And of course, speaking of strong items, there are definitely some very powerful items in both common and legendary decks, which can be an absolute game changer. And even more, there are a couple of classes that want items for must upgrade as well, specifically Sorcerer and Archer. And also don't forget that in order to activate Adventurer Rest on Expert difficulty, you must discard an item. So even when all items presented in the shop are quote-unquote useless, they can still be useful at least for that purpose. So all in all, the shop town action usually has a high priority for me, and because of the sheer number of cards in the decks, which makes it pretty hard to find the single item you want for your build, I would say this stays relevant in both early and mid to late game. Next, the in-town action, or tavern as I call it, is a pretty interesting one. It can instantly heal you to full HP and clear your entire cooldown track, including those clogging over fatigue dice, which is obviously very powerful. But generally speaking, I try to avoid this town action as much as I can, because whenever you spend a limited town action on the inn, you're not really gaining anything, just catching your breath, so to speak, so you're not gaining XP, items, skills or anything really. Now of course there are some good use cases for visiting a tavern. For example, when your cooldown track has several over fatigue dice you got from an unlucky delve card, or by defeating enemies with the enemy skill rot, or when you are very low on health and you don't have any healing or damage prevention to survive the upcoming battle. In such cases, it's totally fine and pretty reasonable to visit a tavern. But personally, I prefer to avoid it at all costs, simply because it's not helping you to get stronger in any way. Next, the quest board, which lets you draw 2 side quests and choose one to keep. And while side quests offer a variety of potential reward, they can give you experience, keywords, tenacity, items and even a master promotion for your class, all of which sounds absolutely great. But personally, I have 2 problems with side quests. First, taking this town action doesn't immediately make you stronger. It can potentially give you some of those cool rewards, but it is pretty unlikely that it will help you in the next battle or even the next 2, because these rewards are quite delayed. And secondly, many side quests tend to make your battles harder by either deploying additional enemies or making you do some other things you wouldn't normally do. So while side quests can be pretty nice, I usually tend to skip them altogether until session 2. Obviously this isn't a hard rule, and sometimes I pick side quests even in session 1, but this town action just has a pretty low priority for me compared to others. Now, the guild kiosk varies a lot depending on your guild, and it can be somewhat a hit or miss. Generally speaking, I would say fighters, mages and thieves guilds, which allows you to train any skill line over the respective constellation, are amazing, and they will get even better with the addition of new skill lines from the expansions. Psychic Order is also great for many spellcasters, especially with Daedric summoning, and Circle of Champions can be pretty useful, particularly for Nodes, Breton or Redguards from the Heroes of Tamriel. And you probably get the idea. All guilds can be quite useful if you play in a particular character, but at the same time they may not provide anything useful whatsoever if you happen to play a class or race that doesn't benefit from that particular effect. So overall, I would rate my priority for the guild kiosk as situational in session 1, as it can range from low to high depending on the circumstances, and in session 2 it tends to go low priority regardless. Next, town square, and based on what I've seen and read, I feel like this is somewhat underappreciated. And I mean, I get it, not all towns have particularly useful town square action, but there is usually at least one town square action per session that I really want to visit, because their effects can be amazingly strong. From training a specific skill line, to upgrading a skill die, to choosing a specific item from the deck, to gaining up to 4 experience and more. I would really recommend not sleeping on the town square actions, and personally I rate them as a high priority for me in both session 1 and session 2. And finally, the alchemy station. And now, to get a sense of how valuable this action is, it's useful to know what potions can do. I'm obviously not going to make a potions tier list now, but I will say that there are definitely some very strong and useful potions, and oftentimes it is actually worth spending a down action to refresh one of these. The only problem is that not every potion is that useful in my opinion, and besides you need to have potions in the first place. So generally speaking, I'd say the alchemy station has the lowest priority for me in session 1, and is a more situational or occasional pick in session 2. So now, knowing all town action priorities, let's get back to our adventures and try to simulate a proper day 1 encounter, and I'll talk through my thought process on that. So starting with our wood elf archer, let's have a look at the available town actions. Here are the 5 available trainers, and here are the 6 available common items. And what of these things are worth taking? First, let's have a look at the trainers, because these are the highest priority as we already established. And starting with these 2 Magicka skill lines, this is not something useful for our character because we're going for a pure stamina build. Heavy armor could be a pretty decent choice, but do we really need this? Again, the whole point of me just showing that is kind of going through the thought process, explaining why we're picking up certain things. And heavy armor specifically, it helps with survivability quite a lot, but again the question is, do we need this? Because we do have our racial ability that can help with survivability. Gaining a stealth status die is a pretty big deal sometimes. And we also have our hawk eye ability that allows us to heal whenever we take damage, so this is quite decent as well. And so in that case, what problem this heavy armor would solve? And actually I don't think we have a survivability problem with this build. Shadow is a pretty decent utility skill line. It can give us stealth, although we already have one. So again the question is, do we realistically need this one? Probably not so much. However, acrobatics can actually help us here. And specifically, I'm talking about just a single level 1 die Fleet Phantom, because this is exactly what can help us bypass certain enemy skills like elusive or retreat, because otherwise this is the only weakness that we have that ranged character normally struggle with. So I would say acrobatics would be a really good pick for this class, but before picking this up, let's have a look if there is any items, just in case that we would want some 2 items instead of just 1. Out of all of those items, I would say restoration staff is just absolutely amazing, but of course not for our character specifically. It's just not the battle form we're using, unfortunately. Now this glyph of prismatic defense is probably the best enchantment for the delve, because you can enchant your adventurer and just safely collect all skill shots without rolling any dice. This can be absolutely amazing, but at the same time, again, because we already have stealth status die with our racial ability, which can do kind of similar thing, not as powerful but still close enough. So I would say having this glyph would be a little bit overkill, but believe it or not, this orcish salad is actually a pretty decent choice specifically for archer, because this salad can increase temporarily our stamina for 2, which means in our ranged battle form we will increase our range by 2, and so we can complete our master upgrade requirements much more easily without investing a lot of experience in stamina. So this is definitely would be the pick for wood elf. Yeah, I'm gonna take the acrobatics and slot in across combat. Over here, I think this is a pretty good spot, not only for level 1 Fleet Phantom, but also if we decide to train a couple of extra skill dice over there, and I don't think we're gonna have a lot of combat either, so let's give us a good room for training either both of them. And for the second down action, I'm definitely gonna take this orcish salad to temporarily boost the stamina by 2, which will much easily help us to get master, which is a big power boost as well. Moving on next, let's have a look at the town actions of our sorcerer. And again, here's all the available town trainers, and here are the new items. And as always, highest priority are trainers, so let's have a look at them first. Two-handed, definitely not. Bow, probably not as well. Acrobatics can be actually quite useful, but not sure if we actually need it. Again, the question I ask myself, like, what exact purpose is gonna do, what problem to solve, and we probably don't actually have any problem that we need specifically from acrobatics. Both of these skill lines, however, are pretty good indeed. Restoring Light and Daedric Summoning, they can fit our build pretty nicely, and we do need a little bit of healing and status removal, and Daedric Summoning gives a lot of synergy with Power Stone and just extra damage from companions. So actually training both of these skill lines could be absolutely legit, but before doing that, let's have a look at the items. And this armor piece is actually a really good one. It says reduce your tenacity by 1 to prevent 1 damage, and as a sorcerer we definitely don't have a shortage of tenacity because we gain this for free at the start of every turn. So honestly, that would be an amazing pick for pretty much any sorcerer with any other race. but because we already do have healing with our racial ability of High Elf, I'm not sure if we actually need this, because there is also another item which is a glyph and enchantment, and this is exactly what we need for our upgrade requirement, and upgrading Sorcerer to Master is a huge power boost. So as a first turn action, first I'm gonna train Daedric Summoning. I think the synergy is just so good with our Sorcerer. I'm gonna slot this over here, and for the second down action, I think choosing between another skill line or this chest or this enchantment. Probably enchantment doesn't give anything right now, and generally speaking I would prefer taking something that would give an immediate boost. For example, like this armor piece, this is something we could already use on our upcoming battle, but purely because of the fact that our master abilities are so good compared to the novice side, I think taking glyph is an investment that's worth taking. So this is the second action I'm taking, this glyph of absorbing like that. Next, let's talk about the Acrobat, and as always, starting with the first priority of trainers. And well, let's have a look what we have here. Bow is probably not something we need. Heavy armor is a pretty decent choice, especially since we are a melee character, but because we have our tumbling ability, which is already arguably one of the best damage mitigation in the game, we probably don't need heavy armor that much, even though the level 4 skill die is pretty good. Legerdemain is pretty helpful, but again, because we're playing Acrobat, we just don't need that extra lockpicking probably that much. Light armor is an amazing utility skill line, but because we're going for the pure stamina build, it's just not gonna fit in this build. But speech, and specifically of course I'm talking about the authority skill die, is an amazing choice for Acrobat, because anything that gives tenacity to our class is a massive help, just because all our class abilities are so good, and ideally something we would want to use even every turn potentially. So the more tenacity the better. This is definitely I'm gonna take as a first down action. I'm gonna slot in this speech skill line, and the question is, where do we want to slot this? And generally speaking, normally I would put things here across combat over there, but because the numbers of specifically the authority dice are limited to only 3, which means I can only train 3 dice over there, and I'm probably not gonna train anything from combat. It means placing this one over here will result in this empty slot, which is generally not a good thing. So in this case I'll probably slot this across health, because even if we train just a single or 2, maybe 3 authority dice, then we can train health on the remaining slots, so nothing would be wasted. So this is just a little bit better slot over there. And now for the second down action, this extra movement is something pretty useful, especially if you're not playing as a Khajiit. This item could potentially help you to become a master acrobat much quicker, but because we already have so much movement, probably don't need that much. And honestly, out of this entire market, the main thing I really want is this Elsewhere Fondue, because again, it's tenacity, and tenacity is so good for our class. So yeah, that would be my second down action for this character. And finally, let's have a look at the day 1 town encounter for our Dragonknight. As always, the first thing I'm looking at the trainers, and actually looking at all of those skill lines, there is nothing I would want to train for Dragonknight. Even though acrobatics does look amazing, and it's a very good strategy to train acrobatics on Dragonknight sometimes, it still doesn't provide that much flat damage mitigation like a heavy armor would, and training them both can be a little bit tricky because they both sit in your cooldown track, and training both acrobatics and heavy armor would be a little bit too much. So choosing between the two, I would definitely prefer training heavy armor, and so in this case I'm probably not gonna train anything in this case. For the items, however, there is definitely quite a few good items. Those small clothes, they are really good. Removing over fatigue for 3 tenacity is good, although it's not something needed for our Dragonknight, because we do have our enduring ability that does pretty much the same thing for free. But I would say this Dark Elf Cuirass is a really interesting item. It says add 1 enemy combat die to the enemy engage, which means you kind of buffing up your enemies so they would deal more damage, but after they engage you gain 1 tenacity for each damage the enemy dealt. And I think the interesting part comes from the fact that you gain the tenacity for the amount of damage dealt, but it's not the same thing as the amount of damage taken. And because we're playing Argonian, and once per battle when you would be dealt damage, prevent all of the damage, so that is amazing synergy we have with this item and this racial ability. It is now effectively once per battle we can now not only prevent all the damage dealt, but also gain tenacity for 1 additional even enemy combat die. So yeah, since I'm talking about synergies, I think this is a really good one, so that would be definitely my first town action, grabbing up this armor item. And for the second town action, I think it could be pretty reasonable to take a side quest in this case. Although probably looking at the items again, I think this fishy stick may come in handy because at the moment we can prevent some damage, but we still cannot heal in any shape or form. So this item, which says discard this item, then heal for 1 HP, you may gain 1 life fatigue to place this item in your bag instead of discarding it. So this is a pretty decent reusable heal, and I think it will really come in handy for our Dragonknight. So that would be my second town action. And yeah, of course, I should probably mention this earlier. In this specific town, it says when adventurer takes a shop town action, they may gain 2 items instead of 1, but I basically ignored this effect because I want to make my advice useful not only in this specific town, but yeah, you get the idea. Now, once the first town encounter is complete, this is where the exploration begins. And the question is, where should you go? Obviously, you have the main quest that usually guides you towards a specific location and asks you to do a certain thing by day X, but other than that, you're usually free to go whenever you want. So how do you choose and prioritize? And well, generally speaking, I would say that now is the perfect time to grab the gazetteer and take your time and study each town. And yes, you absolutely can and probably even should do it. And let me explain. As we already established, your character grows stronger by acquiring experience, training new skill lines, gaining items, and promoting your class to master. And for the most part, you can get all of that anywhere on the map. However, this is really important. Certain places and certain town square actions specifically can offer you some of those things much more easily. For example, in Alton Caramont, you can train any thief skill line of your choice instead of relying on the luck of the draw, which is honestly huge. Or in Deadwater Village, you can choose a specific weapon or armor from the entire common item deck, which can be a totally game changer. Or in Fort Redmane, you can train a warrior skill die for free at no experience cost, and there are many more examples like that. Obviously, it all depends on the specific region and character you're playing, but generally I would say there are at least 1 or 2 town squares like that are definitely worth visiting, and this is why it might be a good idea to plan your journey accordingly. And by planning, I mean not necessarily counting your Overland hexes precisely, although you can totally do that, but at least having a general idea like, in that area a useful town action for my character, so I might consider moving in that direction, kinda like that. So once you know the general direction of the map you want to explore, now let's have a look at the 5 specific landmark types you want to land on during your travel and how I usually prioritize them. Empty hexes are not technically landmarks at all because, well, there is nothing on them, they're empty. And it means if you end your movement on one of these hexes, you miss the opportunity to get stronger as you won't get any experience, items, skills or anything. So I would say avoid empty hexes at all costs. Next are peaceful encounters. Most of them grant 1 experience and sometimes you can get items, keywords or persistent effects. And I would say the main benefit of peaceful encounter is that they give you some reward while being low risk. And it's also a nice way of rounding up your enemy pool when you need to, though I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. So peaceful encounters are not something I would do all the time, but doing them strategically can be quite beneficial. Next are town encounters, and we've already covered in depth what they offer, and I think towns are the best when used strategically, especially when you're going for a specific town square action that you know can provide a significant boost to your character. Next are conflict encounters, and they are the main source of experience and a steady supply of items, and typically the highest priority landmark. And finally there is an unstable landmark, which can turn out to be either a town, peaceful or conflict encounter, with the key difference that you never know which one you get, but you always gain 2 tenacity regardless of success. Personally, I value those 2 extra tenacity a lot. They can make a big difference in the early battles, which can then help snowball your power. But the important caveat is that there are some encounters with quite nasty unstable effects, which can make the encounter more challenging. So while I think unstable landmarks are honestly the best when it comes to the value they provide, especially in the early game, this is probably not something I recommend for complete beginners. So since day 1 is always a town encounter and day 12 is usually the final battle encounter, it means you have 10 days that you can spend in between. And out of those 10 days, my session 1 typically looks something like this. Around 5 unstable or conflict encounters, 3 town encounters and 2 peaceful encounters. And later in the game I usually get even more selective and prioritize conflict encounters above all, so my session 2 typically has around 8 conflict, 1 town and 1 peaceful encounters. Now obviously things can change a bit depending on the main quest, plans, mood, etc. And of course you can totally play completely different and still win and have fun. So these numbers are not a rule by any means, they just mean to give a rough idea of how I usually play, again as just as a rough guideline. So now it's the beginning of day 2 in our example, you know the general direction of the map you want to be heading towards, and you know it's a good idea to have some conflict encounters to get that experience rolling. So next, let's have a look at how we can handle those early battles with each of our starting characters. And once again, I'll be doing this in true solo, which is the hardest way to play by far, so if you learn how to handle those battles solo, then you'll have no problem playing with multiple adventurers too. Alright, starting with our Wood Elf Archer, let's see how we can handle this early fight. And I have the following encounter from the general type. From the general pool, it says Unsealed Pool, and I already set up the clash, and it says when deploying enemies, use as many beast enemies as possible, and after deploying enemies, flip party size, which means one level 1 enemies to their level 5 side without adjusting their HP. So I initially deployed this level 1 enemy Gar with 5 health because it has enemy skill Colossal, and I have 2 combat dice, so with 5 health, but then I would need to flip it to the level 5 side without adjusting HP. This is why we have Crocodile level 5 with 5 HP instead of 6, and we also have another level 1 beast, which is Wolf over there. And now I would say there is already a question, where do we want to deploy our character? Just let's for a moment, let's say if I place this here, will I be able to attack or engage this round? I could potentially, yeah, but our innate ability not gonna trigger, which says at the start of your turn, if you are in ranged battle form, deal 2 damage to a targetable enemy, and unfortunately because our range is only 3, there would be no targetable enemies regardless of where we start. But if we can simulate how enemies would move, let's see, this crocodile would move 2 hexes somewhere like that, and the wolf, it would move 2 hexes maybe like that, 1 and 2, that would be the main obvious path. But let's say if we would deploy here instead, and let's say if we end our movement, our turn on the same hex, then this wolf could move not only 1, 2 to this hex, but also on this hex, because this time it will be a tie between this distance, so we can move this wolf either here or there. And I think this would give us a little bit more strategic advantage. So I'm gonna deploy the character on this hex. Now it's the beginning of combat round 1, and let's see, do we even want to engage? And well, let's see what our options are. First of all, and kind of the obvious choice, is that we can move forward either, for example, like that, or maybe potentially on that hex and engage, but the problem is because our range is only 3, it means regardless wherever we stand and engage the enemy, we're still likely gonna hit back because enemy movement is 2 and our range is 3. That is a big bummer, and I would say exactly for this reason it's always worth to upgrading your range up to 4 at least, because that's a big breakpoint where you can engage enemies while still being in the safe distance. This is such a big difference, but we don't have that luxury just yet. Another option would be to using our Orcish Salad, which says you may temporarily increase your stamina and Magicka by a collective total of 2 for the rest of the turn, and if we do that, we can indeed engage enemies from a safe distance. The only problem is that this is obviously as a consumable item, it's a one-time use, you would discard this item, and personally I would rather save this item for a little bit later to help promote to the Master Archer. And probably a third option would be to just stand in here like that, not move at all, not engage the enemy, but maybe potentially even roll in some combat dice in defensive battle form. And do we actually need this? And well, honestly, I don't think so, because in worst case scenario we can go to stealth if needed, so I think I'm not gonna do anything, I'm not gonna roll combat dice in defense, even though that could be a pretty decent strategy, but in this case I would rather save them so I could attack next turn. So yep, I'm just leaving my turn exactly like that, which may seem like a waste, but I think this is a decent move because now it's enemy's turn, they move 1, 2, and let's say this enemy, we could now place this 1 and 2 because there's a tie now between these 2 hexes as I explained, but I think placing it here would be a little bit more strategic to our advantage. Okay, now it's the beginning of combat round 2, and now we do have range to our both of these enemies, so that means our innate ability can trigger at the start of your turn. If you are in ranged battle form, which we are, deal 2 damage to a targetable enemy, and I'm definitely gonna choose this crocodile to deal 2 damage to this beast. Let's go. Okay, and now this enemy has 3 HP left, and that could be potentially exactly enough to defeat it in one go, because all of those dice, they on average statistically deal 1 damage each, so that probably should do it. I'm gonna roll both my snap dice alongside 1 combat die targeting crocodile. Let's go. And yep, as statistically expected, we've got our damage, 3 damage exactly, so yep, this enemy is defeated. Placing this in the defeated stack and placing my dice like that. Now we still have not moved yet, and I think I'm just gonna move 2 hexes, 1 2 like that, because this way this wolf not gonna hit me next turn, but it still will be in range to our innate ability, so this is good. Now it's enemy's turn, and as I said, it's gonna move just 2 hexes, 1, 2, something like that. Now it's the beginning of combat round 3, the innate ability kicks in, dealing 2 damage to this wolf, bringing it down to just 2 health. We're recovering those snap dice, so we now have pretty much all the damage ready to defeat this enemy. But before doing that, I would like to collect a cache, at least one of them. So you know what, I think this turn I'm not gonna engage at all. Instead I'm gonna do double movement, so moving 1, 2, 3, and then another move action, which would probably be something like that, 1 and 2 more. And while we're doing that, while we're stepping on this cache, I'm gonna make a lockpick check on some legendary item. Let's say this one. Sure what that is, but we'll get to make a lockpick check on 1, 5, 2, 1, 4 attempts, so let's go. Wow, this is absolutely horrible, nothing even close to 1, and because it's a legendary item we need to have this key digit first. Do we need to gain, do we want to have 3 light fatigue to adjust this to 1? And honestly, probably not really. So I'm gonna roll this again, 3 more attempts. Wow, you look at that, just absolutely horrible roll. And we've got another 4, and well, I guess, yeah, you know what, let's do this. I'm adding 3 light fatigue to change this to 1 to our key digit, then I'll place this 5 like that, and then we have 2 more attempts to roll 2 and 1. Let's go. Oh, do you look at that? 4 and 5 again, final attempt, 2 and 1, let's go. Okay, and that is 2 and 4. Oh, not that bad, even though that's still 3 more light fatigue. Wow, that is a lot, yeah. I'm gonna take it. 3 more light fatigue like that for a legendary item. Was it worth it? Sometimes not, but sometimes you never know. It could be a really good item for our build, and there is a very useful bow and a very useful item. Obviously in this case it doesn't really matter, it's just a test example just to show you the strategy. Yeah, we've got the skull. I'm not even gonna place this here, just for this demonstration purposes I'm gonna place this aside, but you get the idea, right? And this cache is removed, and yep, since we're done double movement we cannot engage in and do anything else really. So now it's enemy's turn, they move 1, 2, that's it. Now it's the beginning of combat round 4, and the question is even if we want to trigger our innate ability or not, because remember it is optional, and I think in this case I will, because this wolf conveniently has only 2 last health left, which is exactly enough to defeat this, and we're recovering these dice just like that, and all our dice are ready for whatever battle awaits next. We could even potentially collect this cache, and I think I will do this indeed, just in case, just to show you that I would normally do this like that. And this time we have item like 2, 3, 4, shouldn't be too bad I guess. 3 attempts, let's go. And we've got 4 and we've got 1, which you know what, I think I'll take it for 1 light fatigue like that. And we have 2 more attempts to roll 3, let's go. And you know what, I think I'm gonna take this again for just a single light fatigue, turning this into 3 like that. And yep, that is lockpick complete. It's not always worth doing that. Again, in this particular case I'm not even gonna see what's that, but you get the idea. If you have a chance to make a lockpick check, then more often than not it is worth doing that, at least in the beginning when you don't have any items. And obviously the cooldown track looks absolutely awful, but at the start of the next battle at least 2 of the dice would be removed, and we still have plenty of dice to deal some damage, and hopefully the next battle wouldn't be that hard to do. No, it's usually actually easier than the first one. So that is the end of battle for our Wood Elf Archer. Next, let's have a look how we can handle the fight as our novice sorcerer. And as always, I have an encounter from the general item pool called Captured, and it says during the clash adventurers cannot use items. Well, this is not something we can use anyway. The first time an adventurer unlocks a cache, the item is discarded and the cache chip is placed on their character mat. They have recovered their gear and can use items for the remainder of the battle. Okay, so I'm gonna place this aside, and we have 2 level 1 enemies, Imperial Bandit and Orc Bandit. As always, plenty of bandits, and just like as before, I think it is worth considering where do we want to deploy. And I think because we do have range 4 this time, thanks to a very high amount of Magicka High Elf has, I think we can use this as our advantage, and I'm gonna place probably our character somewhere like that, because standing on the back of the entrance tile we have the range to at least this unit, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's still safe. We're not gonna be taking any damage because they won't be able to reach it. Okay, so this is where I'm gonna deploy. It's the beginning of combat round 1, and again at this very moment our innate ability triggers at the start of your turn if you are in Magicka, which we are. gain 1 tenacity, fantastic. And I think all I'm gonna do is just engage rolling these 2 dice, targeting Orc Bandit, because we do have range and sight. Let's go. And wow, we've got pretty much no damage, only 2 damage and 1 miss. Yeah, which means this enemy takes only 1 damage because of its 1 defense. Yikes. And I'm gonna place both of these dice like that and gain another tenacity. And it looks like not much I could do. None of our abilities are very helpful just yet, so I'm gonna leave my turn like that. Now it's enemy's turn. Let's go with this Orc Bandit first. Moves 1, 2, and the same for this Imperial Bandit. And I guess it could move either 1, 2 on this hex, and maybe 1, 2 on this hex. It doesn't matter in this case. So just in case, I'm gonna place this here, even though I think there won't be any difference in this case. Okay. So it's beginning of combat round 2, gaining another 3 tenacity thanks to this innate ability, and then recover both of these dice. Alright, now because this enemy is aggressive and it has 2 combat, I'll definitely try to finish off this enemy before it engages, otherwise we might be in trouble. So I'm rolling these 2 dice, targeting Orc Bandit. Let's go. And this time I've got a basic 2 damage and 4 damage, but for the cost of dealing 1 2 damage to Adventurer, and it looks like I have to take it, otherwise just as this single die won't be enough to defeat this enemy. So yeah, this is what I'm gonna do, placing both of them, and I'm taking 1 true damage because of this side, but this is now enough damage to defeat this enemy. Alright, now the question is if we want to move at all, and I would say yes, because I would love to collect a couple of caches at least, or at least 1, but remember, because of these extra rows, the first cache we collect is just to unlock our items, which we don't need anyway, but basically the first cache we unlock would be wasted. But I'm gonna try to do this anyway. I'm gonna move 1, 2, just because of our limited stamina we can move only 2, and that's it. Now it's enemy's turn, and they move 1, 2 like that, and engage with a single enemy combat die. Let's go. And we've got 1 damage, as pretty much expected. Yep, we have no way of preventing damage, so we take 1 damage, and that's it. Now it's the beginning of combat round 3. We gain 1 free tenacity from our innate ability and recovering these dice. And now the question is if we want to engage maybe and then unlock the cache, or maybe if we want to move away completely. And I think this is what I'm gonna do. Instead of engaging at all, I'm just gonna use a double movement, moving 1, 2, 3, 4, and if I end up with my movement there, it means the enemy won't be able to reach me next turn, which is fantastic. So this is what I'm gonna do. 1, making a lockpick check on this item, let's say 6, 1, 4, 3 attempts. Let's go. And it looks like I can take all of this for the cost of 3 light fatigue, right? Because I can take this one into 6, this into 1, and this into 4. And you know what, I think I'll take this on average. This is more or less how it would go anyway. So yep, this is what I'm gonna do, placing 3 life fatigue, and this lockpick check is successful, but we're not gaining any item, just basically placing this like that to indicate that we unlocked. We'll get back our items. Okay, and that was only my first step. I still have 1 more, and then I can make another move action, moving 1, 2 like that. Alright, now it's enemy's turn, and they move just 1, 2, and they cannot reach us. Now it's the beginning of combat round 4, gaining another tenacity, and we're now at 5, which is pretty good, recovering these 2 light fatigue. And I think this turn I'm gonna try to both engage and make a lockpick check, and then potentially even move away from this enemy, and you'll see how. Okay, so first action, I'm making engage, targeting this Imperial Bandit with 2 dice. Let's go. Okay, this is not as good as I was hoping for, because yeah, this is definitely an overkill. We don't need any extra tenacity, and this is just a basic 2 damage, which means the enemy takes only 1 like that. Okay, placing these dice to the cooldown track, and I choose him not to resolve this phase at all. But now, since we're at full 5 tenacity, I think we're gonna spend 4 of them for using our power surge, which says spend any amount of additional tenacity and choose an adventure to recover the leftmost number of dice from the cooldown track equal to the additional amount of tenacity spent. So I'm spending 1 to activate this, and then 3 additional tenacity, so I'm bringing myself down to 1, but I'm recovering all of those dice, which means I can now roll them again. And this is exactly what I'm gonna do. So I'm taking another engage, and I'm adding 2 light fatigue because I'm playing in the expert difficulty, and rolling these dice again, targeting the same Imperial Bandit. Let's go. And wow, we've got another sighter that deal damage. I'm probably not gonna resolve this one, I don't need that much tenacity, but I will take this one, which means I'm taking 1 true damage and just on the last health chip, but I'm dealing 4 damage, which means this bandit takes 3 damage as well. Alright, I'm placing those dice like that. Then I still have not moved this turn yet, so I'm gonna move 1-2 hexes on this cash chip. I'm gonna make another lockpick check. This time I will gain this item. So it's 2, 3, 4, 3 attempts, let's go. And well, I guess I'll take one of these 5s to turn into 4 for 1 tenacity. Alright. Then 2, oh, we've got 2 actually, yeah, we've got 2, alright. I'm gonna place it like that, and we have 2 more attempts to roll 3, let's go. And we've got 4, which, you know what, I'll take it for 1 extra tenacity, 1 extra light fatigue. Place this like that. Okay, and we've got an item. And just as I explained, I don't care about this in this example, but you get the idea. I'm gonna try to collect at least 1 cash, or ideally even 2 if I can. So yep, this one is discarded. Alright, and I think I'm gonna end my turn like that, since I'm on the safe spot, because the enemy cannot reach, right? Yeah. So this is the enemy's turn, they move 1, 2, and that's it. Now, beginning of combat round 5, I'm recovering those only 2 light fatigue, but still gaining 1 tenacity from the innate ability. And now I think I'm gonna use my power surge again, so I'm spending 2 tenacity with only 1 of them being additional tenacity to recover a single die, and this is what I'm gonna roll, targeting Imperial Bandit. Let's go! And we've got the basic damage, which is exactly enough now to defeat this enemy. Yay! But of course I'm not gonna end the battle like that just yet. First I will try to make another lockpick check, since I have not moved this turn yet. I'm gonna move 1, 2 and make another lockpick. Let's try on something like 1, 5, 6 for example, and let's see what we get. And we've got 1 and double 3, no, I think that would be too much. 2 more attempts to roll 5 and 6. Okay, double 6, not too bad. Definitely take this one, and 1 for 1 life fatigue like that. Okay, and this is another item, and items are really important, especially for Sorcerer, because we do want to collect as many enchantments as we can to promote the master as quick as we can. So this cash chip is now removed and unlocked, but before finishing off the battle completely, I'm still gonna use my racial ability to teleport to the entrance hex, to the entrance tile, and heal for 3 health, so we're now at full 4 health, which is not too bad. And of course at the start of the next battle we will recover the dice, so we still have not too many dice in our cooldown track like that, which is very doable, so this is not too bad. And that would be the end now of this battle. Alright, now let's have a look at how we can handle the fight as the Acrobat with 1 hand and shield skill line. For this clash encounter I have a conflict card called Highwayman, and it says after each time a cache is unlocked, you may discard the item to instead set aside the cache chip. If successful, the encounter reward is 1 XP for each set aside cache. So basically, unless we unlock those caches, we're not gonna gain any reward for this encounter, and ideally we would want to unlock all 3 of them. Alright, we have 2 level 1 enemies, Wood Elf Bandit and Breton Bandit, and in this case I think I'm gonna deploy someone like that, because I do plan to attack and engage this Breton Bandit right away. And because Breton Bandit has the enemy skill Steal, and because we have only 4 HP, I think it is pretty reasonable to assume that there is a high chance they might steal our Elsewhere Fondue, and I definitely don't want to lose the item just like that. So you know what, I think as my first action I'm just gonna use this item right away to roll 3 enemy combat dice and gain tenacity equal to the damage rolled. So this is what I'm gonna do, discarding this Elsewhere Fondue to roll 3 enemy combat dice and gain that much tenacity. Let's go. Oh, look at that, we've got 5 tenacity, 5 damage, but you know what, I think this is just unreasonable. It's too lucky, so let's just assume that and pretend that I rolled 3 instead, because I think that would be more statistically average. So this is how much tenacity I gain, just 3 instead of 5, because I didn't want to get too lucky on the camera, you know. And this item is discarded, so we are now have nothing to lose against this Breton Bandit, which is fantastic. And well, in this case I'm just gonna move 1 hex like that and engage this enemy, rolling both Shield Discipline and alongside this combat die, because we have 3 stamina. So this is what I'm rolling, let's go. Oh, and we've got only 2 damage and a miss, a little bit unfortunate, but hey, whatever I'm gonna do. I'm gonna gain 1 tenacity and dealing 2 damage. But this enemy takes only 1 because of its defense. I'm gonna place this one in my active slot and exhaust combat die like that. And that's it, that was the end of my turn. Now let's go for Breton Bandit first. They engage me and doing Steal, but I don't have any items, so we can just ignore this part and just roll in a single enemy combat die. and that is 1 damage, but I'm preventing this with my shield discipline, so no damage taken. And for the wood elf, let's see, it moves 2 hexes. It could go 1 or 2, or it could go 1, 2 on this one. And I think I'm actually gonna place this on the cache just like that, and hopefully you'll see why. So now it's the beginning of combat round 2. I'm recovering these 2 dice just like that. Now as my first action, I think I'm gonna roll all of those 3 dice again, targeting Breton Bandit. Let's go. Oh, come on. Not have enough damage, but just 2 damage. Yep. This enemy takes only 1 because of its defense, which is a little bit annoying. This goes to my active slot. These 2 are exhausted and I'm gaining tenacity. Now I think I'm gonna try to unlock a couple of caches, and I think that is exactly what I'm gonna do. First I'm gonna use my move action, so I'm just moving 1, 2, 3 hexes like that. And first I'm just gonna make a proper normal lockpick check, not gonna use my ability just yet. So that is a 5, 3, 1, 3 attempts, let's go. And we've got 3 and 2, so for 2 light fatigue that could be, oh yep, I think we can do this. So I'm just gaining 2 light fatigue like that to complete this lockpick check. Alright, so this item is discarded, but we're gaining this this cache chip, which is basically hoops as a set aside chip that we can gain that much experience. Now I'm gonna spend 1 tenacity to trigger arousing speed, so moving 2 more, 1, 2, and now once per battle you may automatically succeed in a lockpick check without rolling any dice and then move out of 5 hexes. So that's exactly what I'm gonna do now. I'm triggering my racial ability to automatically succeed in this one and then moving 5 different hexes, so I can move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that, and ta-da, we became just a master acrobat just like that. This is why I love this pair of acrobat and gadget so much. I think it's really good. And finally I'm gonna use arcane alacrity, which says place yourself 2 to 4 hexes away from your current hex, then spend any amount of additional tenacity to deal each adjacent enemy damage equal to the additional tenacity spent. So I'm gonna spend all 4 tenacity down to 0. I'm gonna place myself 2 to 4 hexes, which would be 1, 2, 3, like that. And I'm dealing 3 damage to both adjacent enemies, which is now perfectly enough to defeat this Breton Bandit, which had only 2 health left, and I'm dealing also 3 damage to this Wood Elf Bandit, but because it has no defense, all 3 damage goes through. Fantastic! And that is now the end of my turn. Now the Wood Elf Bandit engages me just with a single enemy combat die. So let's go! And we've got 1 damage, but I'm preventing that using this shield discipline. Alright, that's it. Beginning of combat round 3. I'm recovering only these 2 dice, which may or may not be enough now to defeat this enemy. It has only 2 health left with no defense, so I think this is a pretty reasonable high chance of doing that, and this is exactly what I'm gonna do. Just rolling these 2 dice, and if each of them lands on the damage, then we'll be alright. Let's go! And yep, we've got the damage 1 and 1 perfectly now to defeat this enemy. Yay! And we can now also make a lockpick check on this item to hopefully gain another experience. And you know, just for the sake of demonstration, let me do this. And by the way, notice how I place these 2 dice in this specific order, meaning that my shield discipline die will recover first before combat dice, because this die is obviously better than combat. So yeah, order of you placing your dice in the cooldown track is important. And of course now I need to make another lockpick check over there, which I'm gonna do, let's say, on the item 2, 3, 4, 3 attempts. Let's go. Look at that. 2, 3, 4. Wow, what odds of rolling exactly that, even in the exact same order. Hey, look at that! You know, just for the sake of fun, I'm gonna take it. I think it's well deserved for all those things and for all those crazy filming on this video. Okay, but obviously, so we've got enough now. Experience, completed the encounter without taking damage, and obviously the cooldown track doesn't look too good, but at least we've got promoted to the master side, which is pretty impactful, and generally speaking, the next battle won't be as tough as this one. Alright, so this is the end of this clash. Alright, and finally, let's see how we can handle this early fight as a Dragonknight, and it looks like it's gonna be a pretty tough one, because the card that I've drawn was the Wacky Box of Wonders, which is another card from the general cards pool, which means you're gonna see all of those encounters pretty often in your plays. But this one says that the first enemy deployed must be humanoid, which we did over there. Each adventure gains 3 life fatigue, so that's what I'm gonna do, gain 3 life fatigue, then rolls a status die and gains the roll result. If the hex 1 enemy, which is this one, is the last enemy to be defeated, each adventure draws 1 legendary, which is pretty nice. Okay, so first I need to roll a status die, which is really nasty, given that I have only 2 cooldown recovery. Okay, let's see what we get. Oh, and we'll get a stealth status die. How unbelievable is that? Now, you know what, it's too lucky. Let me roll this. Oh, and we've got Bleed, we've got the Bane, which is basically as bad as you can get. I can't think of anything that would be worse than that. I mean, even Fear, you know what, I could potentially survive that. Daze and Maim wouldn't be that bad, so yeah, I think Bane is really the worst one. I mean, the best in case of, you know, depending on how you look at that, but yeah, this is what I'm getting, which is absolutely horrible. And the question is, where do I want to deploy? And well, it looks like given those enemies, they are pretty far away. I think in this case it would be wiser to probably just stand in there, not engaging, even though we can reach them, right? We can move 1, 2, 3 and reach and engage those enemies, but just by looking at this cooldown track, I think that might be not the best idea. So even though it is initial instinct to just rush and attack the enemies, in this case I'm probably not gonna do this. Okay, so it's beginning of combat round 1, and at the beginning of this round I'm taking 1 true damage because of the Bane. How bad is that? Okay, now I'm recovering 2 light fatigue, and now the question is if I want to roll this combat dice in defense or should I keep it as something I could use for my engage to deal some damage. And given that this enemy has 5 health with 1 defense, but I do ignore 1 defense on my target while there is more enemies than a defeated adventurer, so it's a pretty high chance that with those 3 dice I could one-shot these enemies. The only problem that if this would be the last enemy defeated, that we would gain 1 legendary item, but if we not do that, I mean if we keep this enemy alive, then there is a pretty high chance it's gonna steal this Dark Elf Kiras, and I definitely don't want to lose this item. So yeah, you know what, I think I'm not gonna roll this combat dice in defense, I'm just gonna leave my turn exactly like that, and I would rather try to one-shot this enemy, rolling all of those 3 enemy combat dice, all of those dice next turn. Okay, that's the end of my turn. Now enemy's turn, they move 1, 2, and this Skelly Boy moves 1 and I guess 2 like that. I could place this here as well, but I don't think it would make any difference since there are only 2 hex distance between those enemies. This skeleton would engage me no matter what. Okay, now it's beginning of combat round 2. I'm taking another true damage because of the Bane, so I'm now on the 3 health, which is super annoying. This is really the worst status that you could roll. Okay, so now I'm gonna move just 1 hex closer to this gentleman and I'm gonna roll all of those 3 dice, hoping for a 1-shot. I think there is a pretty decent chance given that those wrecking blows I can deal either 2 or 3 damage, so even if one of them would be miss, you know, I think this is a pretty good chance anyway. So this is what I'm rolling, targeting Renegade Bandit, let's go. And it looks like we did it. This would be 2 damage and 3 damage and 1 more, 6, yep. That is a little bit an overkill. I could have potentially saved this one or keep this in defense, but hey, you never know what you get, so you know, can't complain. This enemy is defeated and of course we're not gonna gain legendary item, but I think the trade-off was worth it. Otherwise it would be too risky because of its steal ability, just like that. And of course the order of placing those dice in your cooldown track is important. Let me do this one by one. First, I think I'm gonna place combat die actually, then this one, although it doesn't, in this case it wouldn't make any difference, and then as part of resolving this die I would need to gain either 2 light fatigue or 1 over fatigue, and I think I'm gonna take 2 light fatigue in this case. I could have probably gained over fatigue quite safely because of our dragon blood ability, but I don't have enough tenacity for it just yet. Okay, so we moved, we engaged, that's pretty much it. The only thing I will do, I'm probably gonna use my fish stick now, which says discard this item, then heal for 1 HP. You may gain 1 light fatigue to place this item in your pack instead of discarding it. So that's what I'm gonna do, just gonna flip this over just to indicate this is my pack. I'm gaining 1 light fatigue and healing for 1, so we're now at 4 health. Not too shabby. Okay, now it's skeleton turn. They move in 1, 2 like that. They engage in with 1 enemy combat die, but because we have Dark Elf Curates, I think I'm gonna use this now, and it says add 1 enemy combat die to enemy engage, and after the engage gain 1 tenacity for each damage the enemy dealt. This is what I'm gonna do. I'm adding 2. I'm rolling 2 enemy combat dice instead of just 1, and let's see what we get. And we've got 2, which is, you know, not too bad. Could be better, could be potentially up to 4, but you know, I'm gaining 2 tenacity and I'm using my racial ability to not take any damage, which is fantastic obviously. But yeah, I was hoping for a little bit more tenacity, and at least 1 more would be ideal so we could use our Dragonknight ability. Okay, but we'll get this. So that was beginning of combat round 3. I'm recovering these 2 dice, and because there is just a single enemy left and we don't have our innate ability anymore, we're not ignoring enemy defense, it means we would need to deal at least 4 damage in order to defeat this enemy, and I think it is pretty unreasonable to assume that those 2 dice would do it. It means it's pretty much even pointless to even engage this turn, and yeah, I think I'm just gonna make double movements, probably collect both of these caches, because we have stamina of 3, we can move 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. Collect both caches and avoid getting hit and recover some dice. I think, yeah, this would be the play. Okay, so first movement, 1, 2, 3 like that, and doing a lockpick check on the way, something like 2, 2, 6 for example. Let's go. Okay, and we've got 2, 3, 5, which means for 2 light fatigue we can unlock it. Not too shabby. Obviously I don't care about the item in this example, but you get the idea. I'm usually trying to collect some caches while I can, because I'm not engaged in this anyway, so yeah, why not? This cache is discarded. But now I'm making another move action, doing 1, 2, 3 like that, doing this lockpick check. Let's see if we have any legendary here. Okay, this one, 1, 5, 2, 1. Let's see what we got. Okay, and we've got 1 as a key digit. This could be 5 for 1 light fatigue, and this could be a 2, I think. Yep, so I'm gaining 2 light fatigue to changing this one into 5 like that, and this one into 2. So we now have 3 more attempts to roll just 1 with a single die. Let's go. 3 could be a little bit better. 2 more attempts to roll 1. Yeah, I think I'm gonna try my luck. Let's see. Another 3. Okay, you know what? I think I'm not gonna push my luck too much, because that could be 5 or 6, and that would be a bunch of tenacity. So yeah, I'm just taking 2 light fatigue to unlock it like that, and we've got it. And obviously, again, I'm not care about the item in this example, but you get the idea, because why not? And now it's enemy's turn. They're gonna move 1, 2 like that. Now it's the beginning of combat round 4, and obviously I am completely paralyzed with all of this life fatigue, but hopefully after defeating this enemy I will be able to remove some at least. So should I engage? And probably not, again, because I'm waiting for this die to be recovered, so then I could roll all of them 3 together, hopefully defeating this skelly boy in one go. So I think I'm just gonna run around, moving 1, 2, 3, and then another move action, 1, 2, 3, and of course I could have got to this one, but this way I would get hit probably, and my cooldown track already quite busy, and I've got, you know, 1 legendary, 1 common item. This is already not too bad for the first encounter, so yeah, can't complain. Alright, now enemy's turn. They just move 1, 2, and now beginning of combat round 5, I'm recovering these 2 dice like that, so now I'm finally ready to defeat this enemy, because it's already round 5, and yeah, that's what I'm just gonna do, just move 1 hex and then roll all of those 3 dice for this skelly boy. Let's go. And wow, we've got 4 damage and tenacity. This is almost as good as you can get. I mean, ideally, in probably the ideal case, I would love to see a miss on the combat die, and on these 2 dice I would love to see this result, like that, so I wouldn't gain any tenacity at all, but with this, I mean, all fatigue I would gain tenacity, but yeah, in any case, we've got 1 damage here, 3 damage from here, and a miss like that. So first, definitely I'm gonna resolve this one, and gaining 1 tenacity, so now our enduring ability kicks off, which is fantastic, and now we can deal 4 damage. Yep, that is enough now to defeat this enemy, and once we defeat this enemy, we may remove 2 light fatigue or 1 over fatigue from the cooldown track, and I think this is what I'm gonna do. So first let me place this one like that, and then gain 2 light fatigue, I think. Yep, and I'm gonna remove 2 from this side instead of this. And yeah, on the next battle, obviously I'll be completely paralyzed on turn 1. I will just recover these 2 dice and that's it. So yeah, I'll be able to start dealing some damage only on turn 3, but actually maybe even before that, because we could use our combo of Dark Elf Curious with the Rachel ability again. So yeah, next battle wouldn't be too bad either. And that is how I would handle those challenging early battles with all different battle forms, with all different starting skill lines and different classes. Now it's the beginning of day 3 in our theoretical campaign example, and if you're playing solo and you had a clash encounter on the previous day, just like we had, then your experience and therefore your enemy pool is likely 4. And generally speaking, I would say whenever your enemy pool ends on the number 4 or 9, like 4, 9, 14, 19, etc., it's much more challenging compared to the next round number like 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on, because you'll need to deploy many more enemies. And it's a simple action economy. For example, just compare 4 level 1 enemies, their collective HP, damage, etc. versus a single level 5 enemy. And so what do you do with this information? And well, remember what I mentioned earlier about peaceful encounters. They are a nice low-risk way of gaining some reward and rounding up your enemy pool. So whenever your EP ends on 4 or 9, it might be a good idea to go for a peaceful landmark and gain that 1 experience, so the next day you can do a battle with an enemy pool of 5 or 10 instead. Of course, it's not always worth doing that. After all, conflict encounters do offer better rewards. So if you feel comfortable enough off with your character. Perhaps if you manage to get some really strong items that can swing the battle in your favor, then sure, why not? But if you don't, then at least it's worth considering a peaceful encounter instead. Next, let's quickly talk about delves and how to survive in them. And first of all, let's acknowledge that delves are typically a bit more challenging than normal clash encounters, and your two main stats in delves are stamina, or rather mobility in general, and cooldown. Once you be able to move at least 3 or 4 hexes and recover that many dice every turn, delves start to become easier. But first, let's start with the basics. I said in the beginning that I wouldn't be covering game rules in this video, but I just want to make a quick reminder of how exploration works because it's essential for the strategy. So you can trigger an exploration in 2 ways. First, by performing an explore action, which is to explore an explorable hex in sight and in range up to your stamina movement. Basically, it's a way of exploring from a distance, but importantly, you cannot perform this action if you're already done a move action, and likewise, you cannot perform a move action if you're already done an explore action. And second, you may choose to trigger an exploration when you move in the explorable hex or when you start your turn in that hex, and that is really important. If you explore this way, you can not only move and explore on the same turn, but you can also move in the explorable hex and not trigger an exploration if you choose to. And let's get some practical examples. Let's say you deploy your character here on the entrance tile, which is an explorable hex. It's the beginning of combat round 1, and your natural instinct might be to explore, because well, what else would you do? And while time is the biggest threat in delves, and generally speaking it is a good idea to explore right away, though that's not always the case. And most importantly, the rules allow you not to trigger exploration. For example, you can roll some combat dice in defensive battle form first, and then just leave your turn like that. Then it's combat round 2, and yes, you effectively wasted a full round, but you can recover dice from the cooldown track, and now we are much better equipped for the exploration that we were around before. Because if we rushed forward, rolling that combat die in defensive battle form would cost us extra light fatigue, and we'd have much more trouble on future rounds. I'm not saying that you always need to spend a full turn on the entrance tile, but it is a valid consideration, especially when you have a busy cooldown track. And I would say cooldown management is the key to victory not only in delves but in the game as a whole. Okay, so let's say you explored and you draw a card tile with this tile shape. How would you place it? And I think tile placement is probably the second most important thing in delves. One of the ways you can place this tile is something like that with this long side, and this is totally fine and legit, but the problem is that the next explorable hex is quite far away. And generally, as a rule of thumb, I suggest placing delve tiles in such a way that you would have the shortest distance to the next explorable hex, or ideally even 2. For example, we can turn this tile something like that, yeah, and now we have much fewer steps to the next explorable hex. Also, branching is quite important as well. You can go the same route deeper and deeper, but if you have branching, then you have more options, particularly when collecting sky shards. And when exactly do you want to collect a sky shard is something to consider too. For example, let's take a look at these 2 delve cards. Their effects for the first collected sky shards is much worse than for the second. So if you happen to reveal one of such cards, don't rush collecting a sky shards on them. And as a reminder, you collect sky shards only once you step on that tile, so as long as you just reveal this card and not move down to it, you can still backtrack, explore another tile, hopefully find and collect another sky shard there, and then you can get back to that sky shard and safely collect it without those bad effects. Obviously, going back and forth may require quite a bit of extra movement or time, so this is not always the right choice, but again, this is another consideration and another valid strategy, which is all this video is all about. And finally, let's quickly talk about some of those trickiest enemies and how to deal with them. Specifically, of course, I'm talking about enemy skills like Shatter and Elusive, Stalwart and Divert, and all of those usual company. I've already mentioned a couple of useful tips in the beginning, but here I just want to provide a little bit more useful tips. So probably one of the best things in your toolkit that you can have against all those enemies is the Fear status die. Obviously it is somewhat limited, only a couple of classes have access to it, namely Acrobat and Nightblade from the base game, but you can also gain a Fear status die from rolling a Wall of Elements from Distraction staff skill line, or you can also gain it from the Dark Brotherhood Guild Chaos action if you happen to play on this specific guild. Because what happens whenever you apply a Fear status die to any enemy, you basically ignore everything, no skills, no problem. It's a really clean and easy way of dealing with all those enemies, but of course limitation is so you're not always gonna have access to this status die. Probably the second best way you can have in your toolkit to dealing with all those enemies is the access to insta defeat effects. For example, like Executioner or Destructive Touch, even though Destructive Touch is limited to only level 1 or 5 enemies, so it's not gonna help that much, for example, against level 20 enemy. In that sense, I would say that Executioner is what probably makes this two-handed skill line one of the strongest skill lines in the game really, because this insta-defect effects bypass pretty much anything, at least Shatter and Stalwart and Divert and Elusive and all of that. I would say Intimidating Presence from the speech skill line can do somewhat similar to that, because again it's a removal effect to instantly remove enemy, which is not the same as dealing damage, and therefore you bypassing all of the skills, but it is somewhat limited, even if you get lucky and roll a bunch of them together with this number to result. Only then you can remove a level 5 enemy. So yeah, I would say this one is a little bit more quirky, but still a pretty decent consideration. Of course, none of those effects will help you against Rally specifically, and when you defeat an enemy with the skill Rally, then you would need to deploy another enemy below level. So for example, if there is a level 20 Argonian Warlord here with a Rally, and you defeat that enemy, then you would need to deploy level 10 enemy, and if you would defeat this Imperial Enforcer, which is a level 10 enemy with the skill Rally, then you would need to deploy a level 5 enemy, so one level below that. And the caveat is that Rally not triggers if this is the last enemy presently in battle, so you can potentially leave some of those enemies, but they can be quite nasty. And so personally for me, as one of the considerations whether I should prioritize enemy with a Rally or not is to see what other enemies already in play. For example, probably one of the worst level 5 enemy you can have is this Redguard Marauder, so if this enemy is already in play, maybe this Skeleton Mage as well, then defeating this level 10 enemy with a Rally isn't that bad, because there are a bunch of other level 5 enemies, but at least these two won't be deployed already if they're already in play. The same is true for, let's say, this level 20 enemy if this level 10 Wrath of Throws is already in play, which is arguably one of the worst level 10 enemies, then it's not that bad to defeat this Rally enemy. There are of course many different considerations to keep in mind, but this is at least one of the kind of thought process that I personally have whenever I do want to prioritize a Rally enemy or not, just seeing what other enemies already in play. For elusive enemies like this Wrath of Throws, and for retreat enemies like this Gadget Cutthroat, to some extent, again beyond the fear and beyond the insta defeat effects, two more tools that might help you to deal with them are either Acrobatics, this Fleet Phantom level 1 skill die specifically, or this level 3 skill die called Pacify from the Illusion skill line. For the Stalwart enemies, and of course beyond the fear and beyond insta defeat effects, anything that can help dealing damage not on your turn is a massive help. For example, like Companions from the Daedric summoning skill lines, either a Summon or a Tempered Soul, which is another companion you can summon, and of course Warden and Necromancer, they both have their own companions, so that is a huge help against Stalwart enemies and against Divert enemies to some extent as well. And also Acid Spray from the Bow skill line to some extent, even though this is not a very reliable skill, it oftentimes misses not only with the dive itself, but also that you need to roll more than 7 with 2d6s, so yeah, not the most reliable way, but when it does land and you do apply Bane to those enemies, it does help quite a lot. For the Shatter enemies, like this Giant for example, anything that can deal damage not as part of your engage, so any damage that you deal without targeting the enemy is a big help. Dice like Cleave from the two-handed skill line, or Shatter Arrow, Scatter Arrow from Bow skill line, and even level 2 Volley to some extent, even though this particular one, it doesn't deal that much damage. So anything that just says deal damage without declaring a target, which includes all class abilities as well that can deal some direct damage, are a massive help against some of the enemies like Shatter or even Divert to some extent as well. But of course not only that, there are a couple of potions and items that can help you a little bit with that as well. For example, for all of those insta defeat effects, if you don't have access to those amazing skills like Executioner, then maybe having something like Potion of Heroism as your toolkit can be quite useful as well, if you place it maybe like that. If you don't have a Fear or Wall of Elements or any of those dice in any sort of way, then consider having this Dram of Detection. This is a really good one, probably one of the best potions, so definitely keep an eye on this one. For the dealing damage not on your turn as Bane or Companions, again there's also another potion like this Tonic that can apply Bane status die to an adjacent enemy. Again, because it's a potion, it's only one time use, is it even worth having this potion and then refilling it, wasting a down action? Well, not always, but sometimes it actually can be a lifesaver. So if you don't have access to some of those skills, for example, or anything of that, then keep in mind this Tonic as well. And for dealing direct damage without engaging enemies, there are a couple of other things as well, for example like this potion, and there are some weapons, quite many of them actually can help you with that. So definitely keep in mind all of this wording that says deal true damage or deal just normal damage, but without declaring a target, without engaging those enemies, and therefore not triggering their Shatter and Chill Blade and all of those sorts of abilities. And obviously all of that is not a definitive list by any means. There are many more ways how you can deal with those kind of enemies, and there are many more coming in the expansions. But this is just something to keep in mind whenever you're playing, especially in true solo, whenever you're creating a character, just something to think about it, like how you would deal with some of those enemies. Will you have access to some of these tools in your toolkit, and if not, then how would you deal with those enemies? And well, I guess that's the wrap for today's video. I hope you find it helpful and useful for your future playthroughs. And if you did, please don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, share this video with your friends, and consider supporting me on Patreon so I can keep creating more useful videos like that. And of course, don't forget to check out tons of other videos already on the channel, from deep class guides to skill line breakdowns to other beginner guides and lots of other useful videos. And well, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.